Yo, bromandos! Today I'll be reviewing The Hunt for Red October, a 2016 movie about Vladimir Putin wrestling Alaskan teddy bears. In 1984, the Soviet Union builds a new propulsion system that renders a nuclear submarine virtually silent, making it invisible to sonar. Fearing the sub to be a first strike weapon built by the Russians to hack the United States to death with missiles, the American government responds to increased Soviet naval activities by scrambling American naval forces in preparation for a potential showdown. However, one lowly CIA analyst with a fear of flying guesses correctly that the captain of the Red October's true purpose is to defect. Now, despite being wheelchaired by a PG rating, this techno-thriller based on the novel by Tom Clancy is certainly a Cold War gem worthy of reheating. Directed by John McTiernan, still sweating from the jungles of Predator and picking glass out of his feet from Die Hard, it was the third and last great film he would make before helming a series of disappointments, such as 1993's Last Action, movies with forced kid protagonists suck, and please Shane Black stop making this trope a thing, Hero. If you're having a where are they now kind of moment, it's because McTiernan ultimately went to prison in 2010 over illegally wiretapping the producer of Rollerball and has been benched ever since. As if we needed further proof that nothing good comes from shitty remakes. However, the year is 1990 and everything about Red October, minus the early CGI, kicks considerable ass. And the cast is no exception. With Scott Glenn, Fred Thompson, and James Earl Thulsa Doom Jones as leathery American naval officers, equally matched by their Soviet counterparts played by Sean Connery, Alan Grant, Stellan Skarsgård, and a sedated Tim Curry. In a completely unrecognizable role as anyone other than Donald Trump's boardwalk caricature, the main character, Jack Ryan, is played by Eric Berggren. In total honesty, I've never actually read a novel by Tom Clancy, but I've heard this one and Rainbow Six are pretty good. For me, the Jack Ryan series is probably one of the most underappreciated or at least overlooked film franchises that still exist today. In the 90s, these films were totally badass. Geopolitics meets political corruption and military technology. Red October was followed up by the much edgier Patriot Games, and this clear and present danger where Alec Baldwin was replaced by Harrison Ford. Skipping 2002's Sum of All Queers, the franchise vanishes until 2014 with Shadow Recruit, a mostly alright reboot that no one remembers, and is now an Amazon Prime TV show starring John Krasinski. Hooray! Like every other horse that's been beaten to death, these later entries lack the vigor of the original three, and while I'm a huge fan of this and overall of this godforsaken 90s trilogy, Red October is my favorite despite it sharing the same rating as The Parent Trap. As mentioned previously, the movie was released in 1990, however the story takes place in '84, and with damn good reason. By the time Red October was released in theaters on March 2nd, the Soviet Union was well on its way to collapse. Exactly 2 days later, Boris Yeltsin, the man who would become Russia's first post-Soviet leader, was elected president. Later that month, the commie bloc states of Lithuania and Estonia both declared independence. Needless to say, for Red October it was either now or get laughed out of the pitch meetings later, and in a way, it kind of hallmarks the beginning of the end for Cold War-themed fiction, with the exception of a few stragglers, of course, namely Goldeneye. The main theme played in the beginning is so damn good, several people mistake it to be an actual Russian army hymn, when in fact it was written by none other than the composer of RoboCop and Conan the Barbarian, Basil Polidorius, now sadly deceased, but once living proof that the Greek god Apollo was still knocking up Earth chicks well into the 20th century. The Russian lyrics, which were also written by Polidorius with great difficulty, were kinda hard to find an exact translation for, but when written down, they look something like this. Speaking of writing, I have to discuss this script at some length because Red October is a case study of how talented filmmakers and screenwriters can take and create a compelling narrative out of relatively uninteresting situations simply by springing the unexpected or raising the stakes. For example, the scene where Jack Ryan boards the USS Dallas. Ryan, who we're told has a fear of flying at this point, has to be lowered by helicopter to the deck, but the weather sucks, and the crew can't touch him or they get tased by static electricity. The Atlantic water is so cold that if Ryan goes overboard, he'll freeze to death in 4 minutes. If Ryan fails to board the Dallas, it means most certainly that Captain Ramius and his fellow defectors will die, World War III may occur, and on top of all of that, the damn helicopter is out of fuel. This is excellent. Right. I cannot overemphasize that enough. Another hallmark of someone who knows what the hell they're doing is that nearly every part of the story, Ryan is in over his head and completely vulnerable to the situation. And that makes him more likable, and it makes him seem more human, as opposed to, a retarded cartoon. Other particularly impressive moments include every scene that takes place in the cabin of Captain Ramius. If you've seen the film, you probably remember Sam Neill's "I will live in Montana" speech, but instead consider the first scene between Captain Ramius and the political officer Putin. The scene between them. Putin represents the prying authoritarianism of the Soviet Union, a power structure Ramius clearly despises, but their relationship dynamic and distaste they have for each other is never put into words, it's handled through subtlety. The movie transitions from Russian to English as Putin reads the word Armageddon, which is meaningful because Hunt for Red October's story is a very understated, end-of-the-world plot about how even small misunderstandings and paranoia can lead to a nuclear conflict that will incinerate the planet. And let me take this time once again to say that this is why movies suck now, largely. It's because they're written with about as much subtlety as a mongoloid slapping you with a bloody severed limb. Written by Sledge-Fingered Sally. So, all that being said, of course I have some criticisms. Jack Ryan's one and only family scene is a little too obvious on the "hey, feel sympathy for this guy" scale, while the filmmakers are simply using a shotgun approach for getting us to like Jack quickly. Someone must have been very proud of it because they were tickled enough to credit the daughter's teddy bear as his freaking self.
Who's Stanley?
The movie relies heavily on sound design to immerse the audience, which was a good thing because at the time the CGI was not great. Old effects, even when they're bad, don't bother me personally, and the CGI usage here was pretty minimal, being used primarily for torpedo shots. However, there is one hilariously goofed green screen moment at the end where I can see through half of Baldwin's face. But hey, who am I to judge? Am I right? Boom! Ha-ha! The biggest problem with this film, though, is James Bond's character makes nearly zero goddamn sense. At nearly every plot point, he's ordering his crew to do something that everyone else clearly thinks is totally insane. And yes, that does make him a better character, and it raises the suspense of what would otherwise be uneventful scenes, a technique I praised earlier. But asking me to suspend disbelief enough to accept that an officer wishing to defect would inform his superiors of his intention to do so, well, there's not enough chocolate coating in the world to make me swallow that one easily. That would be like a criminal informing the police of their intention to break the law. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, really. Now, the filmmakers get around it, though, by having Connery explain that the Russian Navy isn't to worry about because he knows their tactics with a wave of his hand. Except that's really just a trick, you see. A trick to get us audience to forget the fact that it's a giant gaping sinkhole in the plot that the rest of the story is built upon. But it's at this moment where I must halt and indulge in a miniature rant about geopolitics and how it relates to storytelling. So, in Red October, Captain Ramius wishes to defect and give his submarine to the Americans to even the playing field, and thus hopefully keep the Cold War cold. And he never stops to think about what the Americans might do with the technology, how they might turn and use it on Russia. And in a lot of Tom Clancy's work, one of the core defining traits of a lot of his characters is patriotism, a strong belief in American nationalism, if you will. And a lot of people might find that sort of black and white thinking in fiction to be charming or antiquated. And I'm here to say that it's not. Like, we didn't think the Soviet Union was evil. We knew it was evil. Well, we knew, with the exception of the New York Times, of course, who, hey, surprise, didn't like this movie, by the way. But there seems to be this widespread motion in fiction now that clear representations of good versus evil are somehow cliched or bad writing because real life is never that black and white. Now, maybe you agree that that is a current trend you see a lot. You seem to see a lot of anti-heroes on TV, of course, but maybe you don't. However, it is something out there, and I would just like to say, news attack, Kerouac, fiction isn't reality. Good versus evil is a theme that never grows old because it is kind of one of the core themes at the mythology that a lot of our stories are based upon. And in my opinion, it really is the blurring of the lines between good versus evil, the attempt to create characters with no redeeming qualities that actually leads to shitty and boring writing where we have characters we can't root for and we don't know which one to be for or against. That's what leads to boring and cliched writing, not the reverse. Anyways, small rant over, and now it's time for a brand new segment to my show, If It Was Written Now, the part of the show where I pitch the movie I'm reviewing if it was written now. Okay, so obviously the political landscape has changed a bit, but if Red October came out now, we'd have Emo Connery, a dark and stormy Russian who sails on a sea of vodka, killing everyone who looks at him sideways despite having good intentions regarding his submarine, the Pink August. Meanwhile, the only man who believes he's good and trying to defect is Jacked Ryan, an ex-Marine who goes around kicking everyone's ass with all the inner self-confidence of feels guy, all the while taking orders from Miss Admiral Greer, who spends the entire movie either impressing her importance upon the men in the room or belittling them for being obsessed with long, hard metal tubes. And with all that being said, I give The Hunt for Red October the official Macho meter ranking of Jack Ryan colluded. Now feel free to spend the next 4 to 8 years dicking around about it. Cold War era thrillers. Espionage and politicking. God, do I love fiction from that era. And hey, thanks to the desperate obsession our media has for picking fights with Russia currently, it's all coming back. Just sort of circling on back like a big ol' mushroom cloud. That's right, Bromandos. We're somehow almost on better terms with North Korea than we are now with the motherland. So, the good news is you don't have to bother worrying about building a better life for yourself or finding a career because your job lies in the vast field someday of World War III, where upward mobility is just a trigger's pull away as long as you don't freeze to death in the muds of some potato patch first. Good news is that Big Brass says the fighting will be short. With any luck, we'll all be vaporized by Christmas. Anyway, thanks for watching, Bromandos. If you like this video, you can do the things that people do below when they like videos. Pretty sure you know what I mean. Also, don't forget to follow me on my social media accounts for websites that don't suck, such as Gadminds and BitChute. Links below, of course. Once again, I'm THOMPSONATOR. I'll see you again soon for more action.
I'm a politician, which means I'm a cheat and a liar. And when I'm not kissing babies, I'm stealing their lollipops.